Good morning to everyone. It's my pleasure to invite you to this SANEM-World seminar on fiscal challenges in South Asia. We are very glad to have Dr. Francisca Leslote. I'm very sorry, Francisca. So better I use the first name. The Chief Economist of South Asia, the World Bank Group. And she has actually taken over this position very recently. And it's also I take this opportunity to welcome her to Bangladesh and South Asia. Especially SANEM has worked quite closely with the World Bank on several occasions and several events. And earlier, Dr. Hans Tiemann, who was in the position of Chief Economist, and previously Martin Rama, and then we welcome Dr. Francisca in this event, and take this opportunity to again welcome her to South Asia Knowledge. And we are also glad to have Dr. Hassan Mansur. There is no need to introduce him to the Bangladesh audience, but he's the Executive Director of Policy Research Institute. And I was telling Francisca that Dr. Hassan Mansur was very instrumental in introducing and formulating the VAT reform in the early 90s in Bangladesh. And then also he has been very active in advising several policy reforms in Bangladesh over the past 2 or 3 decades. Then we are also glad to have Barrister Mohammad Samir Sattar, the President, Dhaka Chamber of Commerce Industry, to have his perspective from the business community. And the topic is, I think, it's not only for the government, it's not only for the government, but how does business community think about this issue of regulation is also very extremely important. And we'll have his views throughout this session. Unfortunately, Dr. Shamsul Alam, the Honorable Minister of State, Ministry of Planning, Government of Bangladesh, he could not make it. He was supposed to be the chief guest of this event, but very sudden event with the Prime Minister, Honorable Prime Minister, unscheduled event. Actually, due to that event, he sent his regrets that he would not be able to join, but he requested us to share with him the kind of discussion what we have today, and also some of the recommendations or suggestions which can follow from the discussion with him. So the format of today's program is that Dr. Francisca will make the presentation, and this is based on the World Bank report, the South Asia Development Update, the very latest. You can see that it was just released October 2023, and then we'll have a panel discussion, and then we'll come to the panelists. I'm doing both roles, so I'm as a panelist as well as to moderate the program. So that's when I will speak at the end. So I will request panelists, especially 3 panelists. I'll come back to that panelists one by one. Though Dr. Francisca, she will talk about more from the South Asian perspective, but we want to have the discussion relevant to Bangladesh. So related to Bangladesh, specifically the kind of challenges Bangladesh economy is facing, and the fiscal challenges, I think, is one of the most important or critical challenges the economy is facing now. So we'll come back to the panelists, and we would like to have, I don't know whether we can do it very efficiently, but we'll have roughly 2 kinds of questions for panelists. One is that we'll ask first, the first round maybe, we'll talk about more on the revenue side. And on the second round, we'll come back to panelists to talk about more on the efficiency of the expenditure, government expenditure. So how the government, what needs to be done to make the government spending more efficient, because when we are talking about the fiscal challenges, it's both the income and expenditure we need to look at. So I know that among the audience, there are researchers, young researchers, students, media, and professionals, different professionals. I welcome you all. And during the open question answer session, I hope that we will get some questions from you so that our panelists will be able to respond to these questions and we have a direct discussion. So with this, may I now request Dr. Fiscal to make her presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's really an honor to be here on this distinguished panel. So thank you, Dr. Rayando. Thank you, Dr. Manzoor. Thank you, Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you all for coming, braving this traffic. I've never seen such traffic before. This is quite something. Thank you very much for joining us. So, this is the South Asia Development Update. It's fresh from the press. It was just launched on Tuesday. So I'm very pleased to show you this. But it's a 150-page report, of which in 25 minutes, you will get the first half. I will summarize just the first half. I just want to let you know, it is also about the energy transition. But that bit I will not discuss today. We will come back end October and discuss it. So for today, we are just focusing on 4 questions that bring together the analysis of the South Asia update, as well as a number I've worked on this topic now for 5-6 years. I've published it in academic journals. I've worked with Carmen Reinhard Kenrober, Hugo Panitzer, with the big research in the field. So I will give you a summary of everything I know on that, on fiscal challenges. And I structure my remarks around 4 questions. First, the economic outlook for South Asia. You really cannot plan fiscal policy without having a good sense where the economy is headed. And planning for risks. It needs both. It needs both the baseline and it needs the risk discussion. Second, what are South Asia's fiscal challenges? And there you will see how Bangladesh, within South Asia stands out among other regions, and Bangladesh stands out within South Asia. And you will see how. What happens? A lot of countries in the region have seen a rapid increase in debt. And I believe so has Bangladesh. So I'll show you what happened in past debt booms. What can be expected for the future? And finally, I'll talk about some of the policies required to resolve some of the policy options to resolve debt overhangs. Not that Bangladesh has one yet, but at the rate it's going, it might eventually have one. And I'll show you how difficult it is to deal with debt overhangs. So first, the outlook. Outlook is actually good, but despite the challenging global environment. So this is a chart that just summarizes the global environment. These are the headwinds that the region is facing. It shows you how globally manufacturing, you might know the purchasing managers indicators. They are high-frequency indicators often used to give a sense of the economic output. You see the weakness in manufacturing for 2 years now already. So the whole economy is struggling with manufacturing and global trade. It's just been weak for a year or so. There was this boom right after the pandemic when economies started to open, and now it's been weak. Now, for a while, this was offset by strong services activity. You may have also received more tourists here. A lot of countries have received more tourists. Even that's fading now. For commodity importers like Bangladesh, it's getting more difficult too because commodity prices are rising. And finally, financial conditions. This is probably what your banks are feeling, what your government is feeling. The majority of government debt in Bangladesh is, vast majority actually, I think 3/4 or so, is external, so it's priced off global interest rates. And chart on the right gives you a sense of how the global borrowing costs have risen. The red line is what emerging markets and developing economies are facing in terms of financial conditions. They're clearly tightening. This is a difficult time for any borrower. Borrowing costs are going up everywhere. Despite this, the region is actually doing okay. It's actually growing faster than any other emerging market and developing economy region. That's what the chart on the left shows you. These golden diamonds are our growth forecasts for South Asia. And the blue bars are our growth forecasts for all the other regions. The region is doing fine. It's doing better than most other regions, actually all other regions. But that in some ways is not good enough because it's less than what we had all gotten used to before the pandemic. And that's what the center chart shows you. For every single country in the World Bank South Asia region, all of them on the x-axis here, for every single country, growth over the next couple of years is going to be less than the pre-pandemic average. So this is a slowdown that every single country here has to digest. And of course, it's also nowhere near enough to meet the government's goals. There is a number, actually the majority of governments in the region have committed, have formed an official goal to meet high income status within a generation. It depends a bit on you find the timing. But none of them, at these growth rates, none of them will meet that target. This growth rate is just too low to get there. And that's that weakness in global in growth prospects is also reflected in the weakness in private investment growth. So for every country where we find data on private investment, it has been weak. You see that here in the chart on the left. The golden bars are the pre-pandemic averages. And you see everywhere, private investment growth has weakened. Now, in some countries, that has been, including Bangladesh, that's been offset by very strong public investment growth. A real public investment boom, both in Bangladesh and in India. The question is, how long can that be sustained? And that takes me to the second question, the fiscal challenges in South Asia. The region stands out as high debt, low revenues, and some countries are already in debt distress. So just to give you a sense of the debt in the region, we have the chart on the left. The red bars show the latest official data on government debt. This region, the average debt is 86% of GDP. This is a highly indebted region, much more than the average emerging market developing economy. Of course, Bangladesh, Nepal, those are outliers here. You see these whiskers in the left chart? That's the range, the full range for South Asia. And actually, Bangladesh is at the bottom. So the government debt levels are just around 40%. But just like the rest of the region, government debt has risen very rapidly. So at this pace, it won't be long before they're somewhere deeper into the red column. And in part, this debt buildup has been a reflection of revenue weakness. And there, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka really stand out in their revenue weakness. I mean, I know everyone always talks about revenue ratios being low, but the chart on the right shows you how low. You can see the dashed line, that's 30% of GDP or 29, almost 30% of GDP. That's the average government revenue ratio for the average emerging market and developing economy. That's how low Bangladesh is. It's at 10% of GDP. It's really extraordinarily low, this revenue ratio. It really stands out. Now, this government debt buildup that clearly happened in the region, in some ways, is something where the region is sort of following along with the rest of the world. It's more pronounced than the rest of the world, but the government debt buildup is something we saw everywhere. And the chart on the left shows you that for global debt, the chart on the right shows you that for emerging market and developing economy debt. It's grown everywhere. It's grown among governments, the golden lines, and it's grown among, the red lines for the government, and it's also grown among the private sector. Now, these solid golden lines have been distorted by private sector debt in China. So we take out, look at the relevant lines are the dotted lines here for private sector debt. The whole economy has witnessed, everyone has witnessed an increase in debt. That's kind of the dividend of 2 decades of very low interest rates that are now coming to a close. And this creates all sorts of debt risks that we'll come to in the third and fourth question. Now the region, I know not Bangladesh, but the region also has at least one country, Sri Lanka, that is rated by Moody's here in the chart on the left in outright debt default. And there's one country that's just one notch away, according to Moody's rating, that's Pakistan. And it has another country, Maldives, that is rated 3 notches away from default. So that's bar on the left, you can see it's now record high, and one of the countries among these 9 emerging markets and developing economies that are currently rated in debt distress, one of those countries is Sri Lanka. But you can see the point of this chart is less to talk about Sri Lanka than to talk about emerging markets and developing economies. You can see this is the highest number of debt defaults in 2 decades. The reason the chart doesn't go back is because there weren't many countries rated by Moody's before 2000. But really, this is a record number or multi-decade high in the number of countries in default. We're going back essentially to the bad 1990s and the bad 1980s. This was the time of emerging market defaults, lots and lots of them, all over Latin America. These are the times we're heading into. This is a very large number of countries that is already in default before the US Federal Reserve has even stopped hiking interest rates. There's still something to expect the US Federal Reserve to continue hiking interest rates. And the reason this is happening is, of course, this is just par for the course. This is what happens. The current juncture really looks like the times when defaults were most common among emerging markets. And that's what the point of the chart on the right is. We've put together about 120 debt defaults since 1970 among 60 plus emerging markets and developing economies. And we simply checked, when do defaults happen? Turns out these defaults happen exactly around the end of US Federal Reserve hiking cycles, when global interest rates are kind of near their peak and before there is a sharp slowdown in the US that allows the Fed to lower interest rates again. So this is exactly the current juncture. This is the time when defaults happen. And defaults also tend to happen, that's the bar on the left, you see almost 90% of defaults have happened in the past around these times when the US Fed interest rates hiking cycle was near its peak, towards its end. And 2/3 of debt defaults happened in countries with above median debt, with high debt, government debt. And that's a number of the countries in this region. Bangladesh actually does not fall into the category of the blue bar on the very right here. Bangladesh's debt is still below median. The median is around 50%, Bangladesh's debt is around 40%. But this is exactly, it's no surprise that so many countries are now in default because this is the time when defaults happen. And it hits the countries with high debt. That's just what happens historically. Now, what did happen, maybe Bangladesh is not among the countries with a high debt level or not above the median of the emerging market and developing economy debt level. But it has seen a rapid increase in debt since the pandemic and even since 2010, what we call a fourth wave of debt. So what happened in past government debt booms? Here we look at government debt increases, booms, sharp increases in government debt, more than 1 standard deviation sharp. And we trace out what happens during these government debt booms and afterwards. I guess the afterwards is really the interesting matter, because now we might still be in a boom, in fact, Bangladesh is still in a boom. What will happen afterwards? So what does history tell us? Of these 500 or so booms that we have found among 100 plus emerging markets and developing economies since 1970, the chart on the left shows you what happened to primary fiscal balances around the boom. So T is the time when the boom ended. Yeah, T plus 1 is after the boom. And it shows you interest rate growth differential. You may have heard the debate of R minus G. If the interest rate is lower than your growth rate, if your real interest rate is lower than your growth rate, government debt, or any debt actually, automatically declines. That's just arithmetic. Yeah? If it's positive, it increases, your debt is on a rising trajectory. If it's negative, your debt is on a declining trajectory. At least if your deficits are not too large. You can see what happens. But before the boom ends, what looks kind of okay, an okay primary fiscal balance, with a big standard deviation, but in many that's even positive, suddenly turns. When the boom ends, what looks like a sustainable fiscal deficit with somewhere around zero primary fiscal balances and with a debt trajectory, R minus G is negative. With something that looks sustainable while the boom is underway, suddenly turns. There is some event, there's some shock, there is some global event, some commodity price shock, there's some interest rate shock, there's some recession, there's some domestic policy uncertainty. Suddenly it turns, and suddenly what looked sustainable before is no longer sustainable. Fiscal deficits become very large, so 4% on average, with a lot of variation, but all negative. And the interest rate growth differential is no longer sustainable. Suddenly debt is on a rising trajectory. And it's in part because of this that about half of debt pools, these 500 plus debt pools that we found here, about half of them ended in financial crisis. Yeah, so if you see here in the two bars on the left, show you the share of these debt pools that ended within a year or two in a financial crisis. If it was a government debt pool, it's a bit larger share. Private sector debt is a little bit more financial deepening, and a bit fewer of them end in a crisis. But about half of debt pools end in a financial crisis. Now, financial crises are many things. They are currency crisis, banking crisis, or sovereign debt crisis. We come back to that. These crises are painful, and that's the purpose of the chart on the right. I know you've seen, everyone knows the crisis is painful. And there are many variations on this. The chart on the right is just a reminder. It just shows you what happened to output and investment 8 years after the boom ended. And you can see that 8 years after the boom ended, output was 8% lower when there was a debt boom than when there was no. When there was a debt boom with a crisis than when there was no crisis. So crises are painful. Investment was much, much lower when there was a crisis than when there was no crisis. Now, bear in mind, these crises we're talking about here are three types of crises: sovereign debt, currency crisis, or banking crisis. Currency crises happen a lot. Sovereign debt crises are actually really, really rare. Sovereign debt crisis, debt defaults are a really rare occurrence. You see in the chart on the left the share of debt booms that ended in a debt default. It's a very rare event. Now we split this here, domestic and external debt pools. Unfortunately, this data is incredibly hard to get by. So this data only starts in 1990. And there haven't been that many debt pools, but not that many defaults. Because those are the low interest rate times. But you can see that domestic debt pools, about 2% of them ended, when it's government, it's a domestic government debt. When government borrowing to domestic borrowers increased very rapidly. Domestic pools, about 2% ended in crisis, and about 6% of external debt pools ended in crisis. So the point of this slide is really to show you that one way of averting debt default is to simply borrow from domestically. By borrowing domestically with a captive group of investors, pension funds, local banks, governments can reduce their probability of debt default. That's not what Bangladesh has done, but that's what a bunch of other countries in the region have done. This is what India has done, this is what Pakistan, I believe, has done. That the vast majority of government debt is actually owed to domestic borrowers. And that does reduce the probability of default because these guys don't run so fast. Whereas foreign investors can be quite fickle. When global financial conditions change, they move. And that triples the probability of default if governments borrow from external borrowers. But there's a catch even to this, and maybe that's a hopeful message to Bangladesh. Governments that borrow domestically predominantly pay a cost. That's the point of the red chart here. They have higher interest rates, and they have lower maturity, about two years lower maturity. And perhaps the most important thing, especially to Mr. Sata, is that it diverts credit away from the private sector into government. So the chart on the right shows that the average emerging market has a domestic share of government debt of about half. In South Asia, that's closer to 3/4 as a whole, for South Asia as a whole. So as a result, you see exactly that. You see South Asia as a whole paying higher interest rates and a much larger share of bank credit going to the government instead of the private sector. Now we spoke about these government debt pools where you end up with a government debt overhang that needs to be resolved. And this is the menu of policy options. What can be done? Very simple, right? These are the 6 options that can be done to resolve a government debt overhang. The catch, there is a catch with every one of these options. And I want to go through this just to end the presentation. Debt default. Look at government debt default. In fact, it's surprising how many of them fail at the thing they were meant to do. The whole point of the debt default is to resolve debt overhangs. And more than one third, you can see that here in the chart, more than one third of them never did that. They did not reduce government debt 5 years later. They did not reduce government interest rates 5 years later. They did not achieve what they were meant to do. It's very difficult to make a government debt default actually stick. So the debt position is better 5 years later. The ones that did stick, the debt defaults that did lower government debt 5 years later, or lower government borrowing costs 5 years later, those are the ones that came with domestic growth accelerations, some global growth accelerations, fiscal consolidation, and IMF programs, because a lot of IMF programs come with fiscal consolidation. So, for example, look at the chart on the right. A country, a debt default, well, 100% of debt defaults were growth accelerated afterwards. 100% of those did reduce debt 5 years later. 2/3 of debt defaults were global growth, sheer luck. Global growth accelerated. That's just luck. But 2/3 of the debt defaults that happened just before global growth accelerated, those also lower debt 5 years later, resolve the debt overhang. Now there's something that's not luck. Fiscal consolidation. 2/3 of the debt defaults that were associated with fiscal consolidation also lowered government debt over a 5-year period. And IMF program is pretty much the same because they come with fiscal consolidation. So really the lesson from these past debt defaults, to make them stick, to actually make them successful, you need luck, global growth will help. But you also need a lot of domestic policies to boost growth and to consolidate, to improve your fiscal policy. No, it needs fiscal action. It's not enough to just rely on good luck. It needs fiscal action as well. And I guess that's why we're here today, to discuss the types of fiscal actions that would be needed in Bangladesh also, to improve fiscal positions. Now there are other options, and you may remember last year when global inflation really soared, some people were actually welcoming this as a way of resolving debt. The catch with inflation as a measure to resolve debt is twofold. First, it needs to be unexpected, and otherwise interest rates will just rise and it does nothing. And second, it only works if you can track savings. The minute savers can move, it doesn't work anymore. So inflation only works as a debt actually there's a third component, which means that the fiscal positions have to be, fiscal policy has to be such that it doesn't just rebuild up the debt. So you can resolve a one-off debt overhang on a one-off basis with inflation if it's expected and if you track savings. But if every year then you just build up debt again, it's pointless. Yeah? Now, coming to this slide talks about trapping savings. If a large share of your debt is foreign currency denominated, or if it's non-resident held, there is no point in using inflation as a way of reducing debt because the exchange rate will just depreciate. And that will offset, that will just raise the stock of debt, the value of the stock of debt, of foreign currency denominated debt. If a large part of it is non-resident held, they just flee. Unless you put in place capital controls, which is the chart on the right. But this is, at this point, is very difficult to do because the world has really improved its capital account openness. It's not so easy to suddenly slam the gates shut and trap all this capital, non-resident capital especially. So they will have to continue financing with a government deficit or a government deficit that they don't want to finance. So it's not so easy to implement inflation as a debt reduction strategy. And the third item here, to come back to the expected or the unexpected inflation, we have this chart. So last year was actually the perfect example of unexpected inflation reducing debt. This really took the whole world by surprise, the way global inflation went up. So somewhere near nil, or near 1%, to somewhere around 8-9% globally, even in advanced economies. And this was truly unexpected. You cannot think of a better example of debt reduction through inflation. Truly unexpected inflation. Look what little it did. It peanuts. Even this unprecedented, I mean, in decades we haven't seen such an inflation run-up since the 70s. We haven't seen the inflation run-up we have seen last year. And the orange bars show you how much have reduced debt in emerging markets and developing economies. 1.5%. When the total debt stock is 60%, really 1.5% of a really record historic inflation run-up is really peanuts. It's not enough to resolve a debt overhang. And of course, the minute it's built into expectations, it doesn't do anything anymore because interest rates will just rise. So that's the end of using inflation as a debt reduction strategy. Now, the final thing I want to come back to is growth. Growth as a way of reducing debt. Of course, growth is the silver bullet that can reduce debt. The problem is no one knows how to generate it. And it's going to get more and more difficult, and a country that's very open like Bangladesh will feel it more than others. The chart on the left shows you our estimate of global potential growth over the 2020s, the rest of the 2020s, basically compared to the 2010s. All the fundamental drivers of global growth are weakening. Productivity is weakening, the working age population growth is weakening, capital investment is weakening. This is your export markets. Not much can be expected from trade. So the specific estimate that we have is global potential growth is lasting, sustainable growth, this growth momentum underlying all these fluctuations, prices, and moves. That growth momentum is falling by almost a percentage point over between 2010s and 2020s. And it's really everything that's weakening. It's not one particular thing that can be fixed. It's weakening across the world, the majority of countries, majority of drivers. It's everywhere that's weakening. So if this weakening happens, so almost a percentage point, you will see that in trade growth. This is your external market. It's weakening. Growth in that market is weakening. So to generate externally driven growth is going to become more difficult with every year that passes. Which means we've got to, it's really up to domestic policymakers to generate growth momentum. And it's an extraordinarily difficult thing to do when there are these global headwinds. So one way some countries have managed to improve their fiscal positions with these is through fiscal rules. And I will skip that because Bangladesh is now one. I'm happy to come back to it in the Q&A if there's interest. It needs to be, the fiscal rules need to be done right, and it's very difficult to get them right. So just as an advertising slide, let me end on this. So I invite you all to have a look at our website, www.worldbank.org/South Asia Development, and you can see a lot more detail of this in the regional outlook chapter. That's where we discuss the fiscal rules and some of the fiscal weaknesses around the region, and especially a spotlight, which discusses how to make the best of default if you must not default, which Bangladesh is nowhere near. It's not near default, so the question is how can we never get near? For countries like Bangladesh and Nepal, the question is how can we stay away from default and stay as far away as possible from default? Here's the QR code, so feel free to have a look. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Satiska. I think the presentation, what she made now, has brought many of the global lessons and try to relate this with the current scenario in South Asia. And then many of these issues are very relevant for Bangladesh. And maybe the debt issue may appear to be not that alarming at this stage, but when it comes to the repayment issue and the burden which is kind of growing in the next few years, and which is likely to grow in the next few years. So that is kind of, I think, some of the lessons will be very relevant for discussion today. And also the fiscal side, especially looking at the very low tax GDP ratio in Bangladesh, and how do we bring the fiscal discipline, impose fiscal rules, and to mobilize domestic resources, domestic revenue. I think this is a big challenge. And this is something what we have been discussing for long. And so I think today's topic and the kind of presentation what we have seen so far, these have I think brought us to very relevant questions, and I'm looking forward to hearing from our panelists, distinguished panelists, to shed light on these questions. So I'll start with Dr. Hassan Mansoor. As I said, that probably we can have 2 rounds. In the first round, we can look at more on the revenue side, and some of the points what Deputy Dr. Francisca presented would like to see Dr. Hassan Mansoor's response to these points. So much.
Thank you, Seven. Let me first thank Francisca for giving an excellent but very brief overview of the fiscal challenges South Asia region is going to face, already facing and going to face in the coming years. And this is not unique to South Asia, this is global. And as I was saying this morning, that I haven't seen any country, perhaps along compared to Germany, that doesn't have a fiscal. Even Germany had a social security program. I can remember that from work on the social security system in G7 countries. That every G7 country has problems with funding the social security system because of the aging of the population, demographic changes, challenges that come through. So, world economy has ever-growing challenges, and we're always coping. It's not the end of the world. Every time there's a crisis, there is also a coping mechanism. Yes, we do some, we can protect some and change it. So, we are not in the situation that our knowledge base is narrow. We are not going to world economy and individual economies also probably learn from the mistakes of the past, policy mistakes of the past. And some countries don't learn, like Argentina. They're always in default. I have seen at least 4 times that they have to come and begging the fund for money, and now they're back again. So, but most countries learn. Market also sometimes don't learn. They keep forgetting the Argentina before, and then they again and burn their fingers and take a haircut. So there is memory shock. We call it that we have amnesia. But remember what happened 10 years before in a country, and the market keeps coming back, lend over lend to the country, which may not deserve to borrow as much, but you get the money. And if you are not fiscally prudent, and you get easy money, you tend to be spending at pleasure. So you end up with a huge debt problem. Anyway, I will focus primarily on the fiscal problems in countries mainly originate from multiple factors. One issue is low tax to GDP issue, which is the problem for Bangladesh. But it's not the problem in Africa. They easily have 25, 30% of tax to GDP. They're going to be spending. So, in developed countries also, it's not the high, they don't have high tax to GDP. In Germany, at one point, used to have 40% tax to GDP, even more. In the US, generally on the lower side of G7, still is 30+, always, percent of GDP, which is reasonably high. May not be high like Sweden, because 45% or something at some point. So, expenditure control is a major problem. For most cases, it is not the problem in the case of Bangladesh. In our case, we have been very very successful in expenditure control, not expenditure management, expenditure control. And it is still very effective. They don't exceed the budget target in any year, which is very surprising that developing LDC economy like Bangladesh can control its budget deficit and remain below the deficit almost 90% of the years. In 1 or 2 years it may exceed, so it's slightly by 0.3% of GDP, but by and large it's well below the target of 5%. That's a remarkable expenditure control effectiveness that Bangladesh has. The other reason some countries fall into the problem is that very high debt burden, and the servicing cost is so high that they cannot cope with paying those and at the same time with domestic requirements of social services. So they are in a debt trap and they cannot come. So every country has its own dynamics and ways of managing the fiscal situation, and it's generally not the same approach. Even in South Asia, if we look at the countries, one would have expected Bangladesh to be the worst case. One would expect that what's the problem with India? It has reasonably about 18-20% total general government. But if you look at their debt, it's very high. I think about 90%. And why? Because the deficit level in many years is 7 to 9% of GDP. And that is general government, federal government plus the state government, that together is 8 to 9% of GDP. That's very high for any country, anywhere. And that's why India is, despite reasonably good growth, it's not coping. Now, Bangladesh, if you look at debt to GDP ratio, we tend to get some satisfaction that it is on the lower side, that's still below 40%, which is sometimes considered comfortable. But to me, that's a misrepresentation also of the fact that given our very low tax to GDP ratio, our debt burden is not high from the capacity to pay for it. Why I'm saying it? Just give an example. US has 110% of GDP after this COVID sharp increase. So global economic crisis plus the COVID shock together, and the Afghanistan war and Iraq war and other things, US debt to GDP ratio has gone to the roof. It used to be 40-50%, now it's now 110% of GDP. Now, what is their tax to GDP ratio? 30%. So that's about 300% of their tax to GDP ratio. Take the case of Bangladesh, 35%, 9% tax to GDP ratio, revenue to GDP ratio. It's 400. It's 4x. That's 400%. So even with 110% in the US, they have the capacity to pay, have better capacity to pay them in terms of our revenue. The GDP is not government, GDP is the economic side. If you cannot capture the resources to pay for your debt, you are in a difficult situation. So we shouldn't be blindsided by simply looking at it from GDP perspective. We need to also look at it from the capacity to pay of the country. And the capacity to pay is essentially the ability to mobilize domestic resources. That's what it means. From that point of view, Bangladesh is not in a comfortable position. It is in a rather uncomfortable position because the debt burden is very high. The service cost relative to our earning is very high, relative to our revenue, and it is growing very fast. So it was not growing very fast in the past. It is now growing very fast because of two things that happened. until 2008-9. If you look at the composition of our debt, it used to be dominated by foreign debt. And the domestic debt portion was zero. And that was a deliberate calculation of that time, because we were relying in IDA type financing, 40-year tenure, 0.75% interest, and very low cost. Versus domestic borrowing was very costly. Even I remember the 80s and 90s, the cost of fund was like 18%, 20%, 16% interest on the government instruments. So it was very expensive, and government refrained from that. So the composition was tilted towards foreign trade, but basically for development partners at a very concessional terms. Things have changed. Obviously, development assistance did not increase in line with price, such as the growth of the economy, and also the Bangladesh becomes moving towards a developing country. Its access to concessional financing goes down, so Bangladesh is tempted to go internally. And as a result, the composition has shifted more domestically and some of it lesser foreign. There's nothing wrong with that. I think that's the way it should be. For any country in this. But the problem is that, and that's the good thing as well, because after all, from public finance perspective, cost is a cost. But from economic, macroeconomic perspective, the debt that goes paid to the foreigners goes out. There is no domestic impact. But if you pay interest to the domestic residents, there is a secondary impact. So economic impact is still quite sizable. If it's a transfer between government and the private sector, you can tax it out in that part of it. And part of it gets paid to the economy, invested, saved, everything. So it stays in the economy. So that composition shift is not a bad. And it is desired. Now, the problem is as problem is that if we want to do more domestically, we need to create a sizable, a good quality financial system which can meet the requirements of the government or the public sector as well as the government. In the case of Bangladesh, where the demand from the public sector for domestic borrowing has increased, and I see no problem with that. The problem is that the capacity of the financial sector to serve the government is diminishing. Why? Because our banking system is getting weaker every day. They don't have much resources that they can pump to the public sector. Bond market has not been developed intentionally, I would say, by with assumptions or by design, because they wanted to have cheaper money and not create the private market where the interest rate can go up. So you manage the interest rates, and with the managed interest rate structure, interest rate policy, managed government debt instruments with lower yield, you don't develop. It is true. So bond market is what we no. So in this environment, when you shift your composition of borrowing, you have a problem. And that problem is getting bigger. Why? Let me tell you why. Because revenue is falling short of target. Because revenue to GDP ratio is slightly falling for most years, steadily, like a secular decline. So the size of the government is also falling. That's not a good thing. Bangladesh size of the government at 13 to 13.5% of GDP is virtually unthinkable. I don't know of any other country that can manage govern with 13% of GDP and provide the basic services to the citizens, build infrastructure, all those requirements. You cannot do it with 30-40% of GDP. You need at least 20 plus to respect your. So we have a serious problem of size of the government, and that is because of the efficiency of the finance division to cut expenditure to a level in line with rate, keeping the GDP below or at or below 5%. So fiscal management has been very good. It's anchored the macroeconomic stability. The cost of it is because the failure to mobilize domestic resources, the impact has been on the size of the capacity of the government to pay for its services, and the result is that even at 13% of GDP, the government finds it difficult to finance it. And even at with significant foreign borrowing, government finds it difficult because at the same time there has been a parallel weakening of the financial sector, which is traditional the government depends on to buy stocks, etc. In India, government can finance bulk of its deficit, so 70% of it from the domestic financial system. But we cannot finance even 2.5 to 3% of GDP for the domestic financial system because we did not develop the financial system in the way it should. It is lagging, and it is not only lagging, it was shrinking in size related to GDP. It is shallower in size. M2 over GDP is falling in Bangladesh. Developing growing economy, M2 over GDP is falling. I've never seen it. That's happening. So, the very weak, very shallow, very narrow financial system cannot even pay for 2.5%. So, last year, government went to central bank. What is the result? Result is inflation, of course. Result is weaker Dhaka, dollar value goes up, exchange rate instability. So all kinds of things. So we have a problem that is multifaceted. It is first and foremost, it is the revenue mobilization issue, and a very serious one. And I have always been telling that this administration, tax administration system, the way it is being administered, and the old-fashioned geographical based person-to-person contact, you will never be able to manage the mobilization requirements, resource mobilization requirements of a 450 billion, which is probably going to, hopefully, can become $1 trillion government in not too distant future. You cannot manage that with that pre-British time tax administration system that was established by the British before 1947. Still, we have the same administration. No? We have the same paper-based system, no automation, same file, paper-based file. Everything is very old-fashioned. You cannot function. Secondly, that's one side. We have to reconstruct the financial sector and make it modern, to make it efficient, make it no more financial depression, no more penalizing the savers and help the borrowers. So make it market-based, make it more hybrid, make it accountable, make it more well managed by the central bank, and apply the regulations. We are making the regulations related to what happens. So we have a problem, which is a major one, also on the financial sector side, which has its own impact on the private sector lending, which is collapsing. Private sector lending is now below single digit. Deposit in the banking system is 6.5% last year, now 7%, which is not acceptable. So we have, this means that in addition to GDP, all of those indicators are positive. We need to address these two issues in parallel. I'm not going to discuss other issues, but just two related issues is same time manage the resources, not just that. Second is that we have to have a domestic financial system which is healthy and big enough to support and not to go to central bank. That's the way we can balanced fiscal management, balanced domestic debt issue, and also non-inflationary finance. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hasan. So, as usual, Dr. Mansur has given a very comprehensive overview of the kind of challenges that we are facing both on the fiscal management side as well as the financial sector. And we showed how these two are closely interlinked when it comes to Bangladesh and current situation. So I now come to Mr. Sami Sarkar. I would like to hear from him more of the business perspective. How does he see as a business leader?
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Francisca, like Dr. Selima, and I'm not going to try and pronounce the full name and embarrass myself. Actually, I'm already quite intimidated because I just realized that I'm the only non-doctor on the stage. And I'm embarrassed. So I'll use that prefixes to my advantage. Person, practicing lawyer with 20 years of experience in the legal profession, now heading one of the leading Dhaka chamber trade bodies. So it's difficult, but I try to see it from a more solution-oriented approach. And we all know, after going through Dr. Francisca's presentation, that there are challenges. But before the challenges, we have to know that South Asia is one of the fastest growing regions in this world today. Countries that in this region have achieved an unprecedented economic growth. World Bank themselves have predicted that the economic growth in this region would be 5% plus, I think 5.6% in 2023, and 5.9%, almost 6% in 2024. While ADB has predicted in 2024 that South Asia will be the fastest growing region in the world. But despite all these predictions and bright forecasts, definitely there are challenges that need to be addressed. As we are dealing with fiscal challenges, the first thing that we figured from Dr. Francisca's presentation is the high level of public debt, which is the public debt to GDP ratio. Luckily, Bangladesh is not too high compared to India and Pakistan and our neighboring countries. I know that India's public debt to GDP ratio is almost crossing 83% of their GDP, while Pakistan is slightly lower, 73%, 73.6%, and Bangladesh is 32.5% of their GDP. So comparatively, we are okay. But what is important is what Dr. Hasan Mansur said, which is the capacity to pay. And where do we get the capacity to pay? It's through our revenue mobilization. So how do we collect? Where does the government get this money from? The traditional approach is through revenue collection, tax. Have we been successful? I would say no, because the tax to GDP ratio is perhaps one of the lowest in the world. I believe Bangladesh has one of the lowest tax to GDP ratio, which is hovering around about 7.8% of our GDP. And why is that? When I took leadership at Dhaka Chamber of Commerce earlier this year, I had to study a lot because this was not my field. And I always had to pretend to be intelligent on stage at the risk of being shown up as a fool. So I did a lot of studying. I spoke to people like Dr. Salim Raihan. I went and educated myself. When I started educating myself, I realized that the main problem lies in our tax net. The main main problem lies in our low tax rate. Why? When I looked at the figures, I realized that more than 90% of our tax revenue collection comes from Dhaka and Chittagong. And when I looked at the economic activities of Dhaka and Chittagong account for only 48% of the total market economic activities. So 48% of our economic activities, and correct me if I'm wrong with the figures, but around that range, the economic activities come from Dhaka, Chittagong alone. But why will my revenue come more than 90% from Dhaka, Chittagong? What happens to the rest of Bangladesh? And this is where the problem lies. We need to drastically, and the NBR needs to drastically increase the tax. And how would it be possible for them to do so? Is that they need to go to all parts of Bangladesh and try to formalize and bring these people into the tax. Because there are economic activities. I myself am from Jamalpur. When I go to Jamalpur, there is a shop mall, retail store there. Not even Jamalpur. Jamalpur has got 5 I'm from a very small Bokshigoj region. And in Bokshigoj, there is a shop mall retail store. So I went inside, when I saw the products there, clearly people have the capacity to purchase these products. Otherwise, shop mall would not have opened in that place. But what is the tax collection from that place? Or areas like that? Before the budget, when we sat with the finance ministry regarding their proposed plan as to how to increase the revenue collection, a presentation was made by the finance, I think one of the secretaries there on revenue collection. They had enormous plans of opening up tax offices in different locations, in different parts of Bangladesh, which is great initiative. But there I raised my hand and I said that listen, opening up tax offices is not the solution. You need to hire the best of your best officers and deploy your best of the best officers in these offices. Otherwise, it will just be a building with no production. Also, I suggested that there has to be a mapping process, a way where the performance of the tax collection from these offices are monitored on a regular basis. আপনার ছবি সরেন নাহলে কথা ডিস্টার্ব হয় আর আপনার এই ছবিতে তো এমনি তো বুঝি না কিছু আর তারপর so that is very, very important. And once the tax collection goes up, then automatically you will see that these all will fall into place. And the second point, which is in relation to the tax net, is the bringing the informal sector. Bangladesh has a very high number of informal establishments. When I say informal, if you walk through even the Gulshan Avenue, you will see there are a lot of businesses going on. But are they fully within the tax bracket? I don't think so. If I go to outside Dhaka, you will see endless entrepreneurs, endless businesses going on. And I remember one time I asked an ambassador, how do you deal with this traffic? And the ambassador said that it is very enjoyable because I see a lot of economic activities going on. Even starting from selling small items on the midst of traffic. These are small examples, but if you look at more like the food shops that are going up, the the small stores and shops, these all need to be brought into the tax bracket. Now, why don't people want to come to this tax bracket? That is the question. In my own law firm, I encourage my juniors to open a PIN number. When I say that, because obviously law firms are different, because there the junior gets paid very little, and then they gain experience, and then but whenever they're ready and they come within the tax bracket, I always encourage them to open up a PIN number. take a PIN number. Now, when I go and find out the mentality of the people has to change, because they feel that once I open the PIN number and once I come within the tax bracket, then I will be subject to repeated taxation, I will be subject to repeated harassment. This sort of thought process has to change. NBR is not there to harass people. NBR is there to collect revenue on your income. Now, many from the private sector say that they're being faced by harassment, and I'm not saying that they are liars, but I would like to think what is normal. Normal is you make an income, you pay taxes. That's it. Now, if you are not compliant, then obviously you will be harassed. If you are compliant, then there is no scope for them to harass you. Unless you have one of those rare cases where it's just in the hands of the bad officer. But that is not the norm. Not all tax officers are inclined to get involved in harassment or be corrupt. We cannot judge it by that standard. So the whole mindset has to change between the taxpayer and the tax collector. Now, I have also received or heard, not received, I've heard complaints that, oh, sir, once we come into this, they will say this, they will say that. Let them. If you are a responsible citizen, if you're a responsible company, you must come forward and get your compliance into order. Because unless we do that, there is no way the government has the capacity to increase this tax. The mindset of the private sector has to change. The mindset of you as individuals, we all have to change. We need to, yes, of course, we need to work within the law and we need to work within the framework and pay our taxes. Why is it that no one, thinks like this when they go to the UK to pay their taxes? There, everyone is like on the top, first in line to pay tax, and super tax. When I was working in one of the leading law firms in the UK, I had a very high level of taxation. But they took it away from my salary, no questions asked, and we were happy. Even here, when I came, I said to all my tax advisors, just to be compliant. That's all I want. Because my mindset is that I'm not happy to be questioned by a tax. I would rather get that tax card and say that, sir, thank you for your services. You've made a difference to the country. That's my goal. Not every people think like that, but every people should think like that. Now, the informal community, if they come forward and say that fine, we will come within the tax bracket, automatically you will see that the tax revenue collection is going up. But you need a দায়িত্ব তো আসতে হবে। এবং main thing is that if you look at the revenue fair, have any of you looked at the revenue fair tax where the NBR helps you to open PIN numbers? Do you see the line of people standing in the queues to open up a PIN number? There is a lot of people. I've seen. What does that tell everyone about us? We want to be compliant. So from the NBR side, they also need to work to ensure that they get the right encouragement, the taxpayers, so that they come forward. Because there's so many places to hide, there's so many ways to hide in Bangladesh. If you don't want to pay taxes, it's very difficult. NBR will not have the full capacity to go and individually knock and get all of this. We as a nation have to come forward to pay our taxes. That's only we can help our revenue collection. I'm not talking about all the challenges. The challenges are there. Dr. Asad Mansur has already given all the challenges. I'm saying what we can do as a nation to overcome these challenges. Because you will be growing up here, my kids will be growing up here. Where are we leaving Bangladesh is a question that we need to ask ourselves. And what are we doing to help? If we are part of the same system, it will run. It will run. Every country runs on their own strengths and weaknesses. But we need to take this forward. Tax revenues, another big challenge is automation. Because like I said, that if you, and I've been saying this since the beginning of this year, that we need to reduce the human-to-human contact between the tax collector and the taxpayer. If I don't have to see your face and I'm filing my own taxes online, you will see automatically I will feel more encouraged. Because at this point in time, we are still suffering from that mentality that, oh, if I go and if I file physically, then obviously I am within the parameters, they know my face, they know me. These sort of methods, it may sound stupid and silly, but actually that is the reality of the majority of the people think that's. So this online, the reduction of the human-to-human contact, the discretion of the taxpayer, the discretion of the tax collector, as Dr. Hassan, that needs to be reduced, as you rightly said. That needs to be reduced. Then only we will see our revenue collection going slightly up. But that does not mean our revenue will go up and our public spending will also go up. That is for the second area which Dr. Salim-Rahman said that we'll talk about later, the second part. But from a revenue collection perspective, these are my thoughts. These are the things that we should, as Bangladeshis, think about, because Bangladesh has made enormous progress in the last decade or so. When we look at these big projects, yes, it is a matter of pride for us. When you go onto that elevated expressway, of course you feel happy. But it all costs money. And we have to manage, as Dr. Hassan, we have to manage these expenditures. We have to implement austerity measures, which will come in the next session or the next part. But from our perspective, everyone says, what are we getting? We're getting traffic. We don't get good health service. It's all paper. These are questions, of course. But if we all think like that, then we will not be able to offer Bangladesh anything. We all love Bangladesh, but we all want our own interests to be protected first. I have always said, even in a talk show live, that even when I was asked about the business community trying to get involved, or some of the unscrupulous traders, as they call it, trying to get involved to control the price of essential commodities. And I said on national that when it comes to national interest, one has to look on top of their own private, whether it's a lawyer, whether it's a businessman, whether it's students, whether it's everyone. So that is the message that should be sent across to each and every Bangladesh. If we as a whole nation come forward, I don't think there's any stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We've heard a bit of the business perspective from in addition to that, we also talked about a few other issues that are extremely important. So what I'll do now, before I hand over the microphone to Francisca to wrap up this part, but I would like to just add a few things because I don't really want to repeat what Dr. Hassan has already said, and Dr. Sami Sattar has also covered a few of these issues. So I just want to add points on the specific issues that when we look at this tax GDP ratio, especially the very low tax GDP ratio, it has been historically low. Though in some years, in some period, we had some success, getting it very closer to almost 10% or a little bit higher than 10%. Then over the last few years, we are seeing a gradual decline. And that becomes a puzzle because we'll see that in the last one decade, the country has witnessed that when you look at the average GDP growth rate, the highest average GDP growth rate in the decade average. But at the same time, you are experiencing falling tax GDP ratio. That means mathematically that doesn't really correspond to each other, because what does it mean? Does it mean that the additional GDP each year the country is generating, it remains untaxed or it remains outside of the taxation? So that's one puzzle. Second one is that when we talk about how to mobilize domestic revenue and tax revenue, we must emphasize, and I think this is extremely important, that Professor Mansour and Professor Saleh Safdar, they talked about a lot of the technical issues, technical side as well, automation and several reform measures, which are extremely important. But I think I would just like to pose this question, and probably would like to get back to them too in the second round, that despite that the government actually committed in the last 3 5-year plans, in 6 5-year plans, and the ongoing 8 5-year plan, for undertaking important reform measures in the taxation sector. And especially if you look at the targets, the revenue GDP ratio, taxation ratio in some of these, in one of those 5-year plans probably is more than 15 or 16%. But we could never achieve those targets. And the reality is that over the year after year is actually falling. Then why is not really taking place? Why is not reform taking place? What is really holding it back? So here comes all the political economy and issues, and here comes the culture of tax evasion, and how do you nurture the culture of tax evasion in a kind of political economy setting, which is not really very helpful for tax improving a dramatic improvement in the tax GDP ratio. So definitely, I would say that the technical side is of course a necessary condition, but it is not enough. Just bringing the automation, because if the political economy or settlement, the political settlement, especially related to the tax revenue mobilization, if there is the kind of common understanding, both from the political elites and the business elites, that we need to, as Professor Saleh, he was saying that we need to mobilize resources or revenue domestically in order to many of the important expenditures. As Dr. Asman would say, that given the size of the GDP, a country like Bangladesh, with almost around 13% of GDP of the budget size, the government size, it doesn't make any sense. And he also rightly pointed out that the whole success of keeping having the macroeconomic stability, while actually we of course they claim that success for over a decade or so, but that came with a cost. The cost is that the country spent one of the lowest public spending on education and health. If you compare Bangladesh with any other country in the world, less than or around 2% of GDP on education, public spending on education, and less than 1% on health, and similarly for social protection as well. So that means the country is spending low or investing low on human capital development, and which has severe implication for the future. So I think all these consequences we can talk about, but very importantly, the point really I want to make that we saw the kind of political commitment the government to increase or bring significant reform in the taxation sector in those 5-year plans, but why these are not being undertaken? What is really holding this reform back? Then also to add one thing that I think both the panelists they also talked about the low tax GDP ratio, but at the same time, if you look at the sources of taxes, less than 1/3 is actually coming from income taxes, and more than 2/3 from indirect taxes, and which is again not very helpful. If we really want to undertake important reforms in the taxation sector. So with this, I can request Francisca to reflect on some of these issues, and then we'll come back to the panelists once again for a very brief period to discuss on the estimates.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's fascinating to listen to my co-panelists, because in many ways this is the same the world over. I've worked on Africa, I've worked in Europe, I've worked in Central Asia, I've worked in East Asia. It's always the same thing, how to raise. I know you've done the same. The raising revenues requires broadening the tax base and improving tax administration. And it's true that often the solution is to create distance between the taxpayer and the tax administrator, tax collector, just like you were mentioning. So the way to create distance is to have these withholding taxes, for example. Those are automatic, the default changes. You don't even think about paying taxes, it just goes. There is no alternative, it becomes easy. Not just paying taxes has to be easy. A lot of people, like Mr. Sata was saying, they want to pay taxes, no one wants to be illegal. But if it's so complicated that you cannot do it, then it's asking too much. Not just paying taxes easy, but only withholding, presumptive taxes, things like that. And the other thing is to avoid this harassment, computerize. I mentioned the lack of person-by-person interaction. Just computerize things. That first, it makes it easier for tax administration to find the taxpayer, and second, it makes it much easier to pay taxes as well. But you're perfectly right, Dr. Rana, it won't happen without a political will. It requires political will. And distance also between the tax administrators, the tax collectors, and the politicians. That a tax administrator can actually achieve is actually rewarded for increasing tax collection without harassment, simply through due process. So there the incentive structures of the tax administration can be changed, that achieving a higher revenue collection without harassment through due process is something that is rewarded, and there is some sort of reward structure to it. I think that in many ways this was very interesting because it resonates so much with what I've seen elsewhere as well. And we spoke about fiscal rules, but the interesting thing is a lot of fiscal rules actually are in the spirit of constraining spending, which doesn't seem to be an issue at all in Bangladesh, rather in the spirit of raising revenues. In Bangladesh, it seems more a structural issue, the fiscal problem, rather than the cyclical issue that is then supposed to be suppressed with the fiscal rule.
Thank you, Dr. Francisca. So we'll have a very small second round where we'll request the panelists to speak on the expenditure side, especially how to bring more efficiency to expenditure and definitely link it to the Bangladesh context. So I request Dr. Hassan also to speak.
As I said earlier, that we are very effective, our financial contribution is very effective in expenditure control. But when it comes to expenditure management, value for money, quality of spending, when are we? It applies to both the development project side, cost is highly inflated, a lot of money is siphoned off. The actual work is a fraction of what is allocated. I'm just not exaggerating, it's more by facts. Secondly, if you look at general services, there also we see that quality of expenditure or the targets of groups that we're supposed to get the benefits of that, they're not getting it. In the public healthcare centers, hospitals, etc. Government gives lots of medicine, but everything shows up in stores. And it is not for sale, but you have to buy as a patient, to send your relatives to buy that and use it in the hospital. So even the doctors in home, they will say, come in the evening to my chair. I will see. So this is the kind of service that we are getting. Our quality of education has fallen. It's not that teachers' salaries are that bad. It's much better than it used to be. Can be better, but certainly it's not dismal. But the thing is that quality of education, which was 30, 50, 40, 60, 70 years ago, is not there. The dedication is not there. The discipline is not there. So we have created what we call educational divide. The rich, upper middle income, and others, they are moving on to English medium, into coaching centers, and other ways of growing public school system, public education system. That's not good for them. So I think expenditure side, the quality issues are very fundamental issues. And I remember one thing that, particularly in two areas, health and education. Long time back, Amok Tushen, he was that you don't need too much money for a good public education and good public health. And he was giving the examples of Kerala, in India, 100% educated. By 1960s, they were 100%. 70s, they were 100%. While we are still struggling to achieve anything. It's a shame. It's not that we are spending any less money than Kerala. Because it's spending more money. Just because there is no drive, there is still political commitment, there has to be a social movement, there has to be some degree of autonomy, and not centralized education. Even a primary school teacher is hired and fired from Dhaka. You just can't do it. There is no authority of the school committee. So there is issue of decentralization of services, decentralization of government, and that has not happened. And that's a major problem in terms of quality of service. Because they are not accountable to the people. They are accountable to the bosses. And that chain of command makes the local population they are neither, you are not serving them, you are serving the bosses. So that kind of mentality is not conducive. You need fiscal devolution along with local government empowerment. And that is missing. So unless that happens, quality of expenditure is going to be the roadside quality is going to be the water management issues, local people, community involvement is not there. It's all designed in Bangladesh or somebody coming from outside and implemented, and then this problem. And even the highway, you can see that some of the flyovers had wrong access because it was done in American style, in a British style road system. So you have to have that. So essentially, you need to involve the local knowledge, local community, and local empowerment if you want to ensure accountability and value for money. Without that. Thank you. Yeah.
As I said earlier, public spending, the public debt to our GDP is not as alarming as it is for other countries in this region. But still we need to keep it under check because of our capacity to repay back that public debt. Obviously, the more public spending or public debt rises, the less that is available for the private sector to credit to grow. That's the normal approach. And now, because if my public debt is increasing, naturally my private sector credit growth cannot be expected to grow at an exponential level. But private sector credit growth is already dropping, right? And that is not only just because the public debt is going up, it's because the whole world economy is slowing down. The demand for my products is decreasing even in countries like Europe, USA, because they're going through their own challenges because of this whole Russia-Ukraine war. And that has really, after COVID, that has really taken us on a different level of economic challenge. Because there's simply no more demand. When I ask my friends in Europe and London that, what about your spending? They tell me that, my friend, the expenses have gone up so much that now we are more worried about our food inflation as opposed to buying all these clothes and fancy stuff. And these are My friends are from a working middle class, upper middle class. So they're working in big law firms now, they're almost partners there. So they're telling us this sort of scenario in their own country. I don't know what the situation in Germany, but even countries like Japan is seeing one of the highest levels of inflation. And because of that, I think, overall spending is going up, and our public sector investment, private sector investment is also going up, and private sector growth. No one wants to take money unless they have to anymore, because they're not going for any expansion. Again, when I took charge in January 2023, I gave a presentation where I said that the main this year's theme should be survival. If a company is able to survive without laying off or cutting its employees, then you should give a pat on your back and say that you've done well. This is not, 2023 is not time to see private investment grow, whether it's investment or credit, because I think both are interlinked. The private credit will only grow when the private sector will come forward and take new projects, take new loans to implement new business or factory or whatever it is. But no one's going and taking that because there's just not that much demand globally for the export market. And for the local market, they're saying that already the cost of doing business is going up so high, they don't want to make a new investment. They just want to stay afloat and revolve whatever credit they have available from the banks already. Now, how to reduce the public spending, our public debt? Obviously, few pointers. These are not rocket science. I'm not an economist that I can give the finer details, but from a broad brush approach, first thing is just planning. As Dr. Hassan Mansoor said, plan your projects. Get the local community involved. Take on projects or prioritize your development projects. As we are going through an economic challenging situation, then there is a deficit. We want to plan our development projects that do not need to be taken now. Don't take it. You can wait. Projects that are going to take Bangladesh forward, let us focus on those projects. Good governance in these public projects is absolutely essential. We don't want to see one road being made and then taken 3 times within 6 months, that road again being repaired. So we have to get out of that, what do you call it, notion, culture, notion, whatever it is. আমরা দেখি যে রাস্তাঘাটগুলো বারবার মেরামত করা হচ্ছে কিছুদিন আগে যাচ্ছে, তো সেগুলো আমাদেরকে সুন্দরভাবে এটাকে গুছিয়ে নিয়ে আসতে হবে। Austerity measures, I would like to thank the government that they have already taken the austerity measures in the annual development plan. And as Dr. Hassan Mansoor said, that we are pretty okay in terms of handling our expenditure, like not managing, but controlling. So we've never crossed that line. So we are good to go from that respect, but we have to implement the austerity measures and spend as little as possible on these projects. And yes, again, these are my 3 points. From public spending perspective, maybe perhaps for the media we'll talk in Bangla. If there are open questions, we'll probably answer in Bangla. Sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just very briefly, again, this is very interesting because it also resonates. All countries in the world are facing a debt problem. And really, one is raising revenues, but few countries have the revenue problems that Bangladesh has. For most of them, it's a matter of making spending efficient. And there it is about exactly the kinds of things as Dr. Mansoor and Sata mentioned. It's about planning ahead, planning beforehand. What are your priority projects? And what are the non-priority projects that if the pinch comes, will be dropped? It's all about planning. And one of the ways of planning is both forward-looking and backward-looking. So one item is forward-looking priority versus non-priority projects. The other item is backward-looking expenditure review, a public expenditure review. What was wasted and what was well spent? That's actually a very important basis for the forward-looking part. And many advanced economies use these routinely now. Every 2 years there's a public expenditure review, and then that becomes the foundation for the forward-looking planning. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we come to this open question answer session. So for that, we'll take questions both in English and Bangla, whichever language you prefer. So বাংলায় আমরা করতে পারি প্রশ্ন কে করতে চান প্রথম প্রশ্ন অথবা একটা অবজারভেশন ঠিক আছে প্লিজ
My question is regarding the informal sector. Bangladesh has such a huge informal sector, and often they have unlimited income. So, what could be their incentives to be included in the tax bracket, or is it really possible to include the overall informal economy in the tax bracket, or what could be the government incentive to do so?
Okay. Second question.
Assalamualaikum. Welcome to Bangladesh, Assistant. It's good to see you here in person because we meet you online last week. My question to you, I asked the same question that they also, and you just mentioned all the countries are suffering because of debt. And Bangladesh, and country like Bangladesh, they are suffering the worst. And you know, our reserve now is $17 or $18 billion, and we have to pay, and we are paying. And we will pay more to you and the other development partners. So, is there any good news for countries like Bangladesh who are struggling? Because in the April meeting, your president, IMF, they told that you are thinking regarding debt relief for countries like Bangladesh. This is one question. The other is our close neighbors. All the neighbors, they managed to manage their inflation very good. But in Bangladesh, the fiscal and the monetary, the two hands are not working together. What is your observation?
Thank you. Please, we'll take another question and then we'll come back to the panelists. So any yes.
This is my colleague from Financial Institution. Actually, coming to the revenue collection and the debt scenario. Already, we have heard from panelists that Bangladesh is one of the lowest tax ratio. And the risk is repayment because of this lower tax ratio. Like you have already told that, actually, I am asking the Chief Economist of the World. You have told that Sri Lanka has such kind of problem they are facing. So, do you think that this low tax base is a big problem in the future days for Bangladesh to pay back the loans and construct the country?
Thank you. So we'll start with Dr. Francisca.
Thank you. So three questions. One about the informal sector, two about debt in one way or the other. On the informal sector, this is a really large problem. So this region does stand out. About 90%, for the region as a whole, about 90% of people are employed informally. That's on par with Africa, that's much higher in Africa, in other countries. Now, getting them into the tax net is a different matter. Many of them are so low productivity that gathering taxes from them actually imposes greater administrative cost than the tax revenue you can get from it. So one really needs to be careful there that one targets the right informal businesses, the ones that are, that one targets tax administration, the ones that are large and actually make profits. Those should be taxed. The little ones, it's probably, you probably have, the tax administration probably has higher, other priorities where they can get more tax, more revenues. And the other question in the topic of informal sector is how much of it can be really fixed by tax administration because there is this feedback loop. Some of it is simply development. As the obstacles to let these businesses grow need to be removed, and then they become big enough to be taxed, and that is what's going after them. On the debt ratio, there were two questions about debt relief, and there was one question about will there be debt distress because of the low tax base. So on debt relief, I'm starting to talk about Bangladesh itself, but I can talk about the global initiative for debt relief, the common framework. And there is a sense that this G20 initiative of the common framework misses some of the countries that really do need debt relief. So that these countries really currently struggle to bring their creditors together. It's incredibly difficult. The creditor base has fragmented compared to the 1980s and 90s. And to get them now together, sitting at one table and trusting each other's data, is a very difficult task. So there is a sense that a larger number of creditors need to be brought in to help with this debt relief. And the common framework is really trying to do that, but it's difficult. And you look back at the history of these coordinated debt restructurings. We've done some work on this, on the Brady Plan, the Dhaka Plan, HIPIC initiative. It's very hard. It takes years, if not decades, to get to the point where it is actually meaningful debt relief. It's just incredibly hard to achieve. So the common framework in that sense fits into that tradition. It's just hard. On the low tax base, creating eventually a debt report, the tax, it's the deficit that leads to that, not necessarily the tax revenue. If there is as much spending control. So what the bigger constraint in Bangladesh is far from any of the conventional thresholds for debt default. It's really far away. It's more about, the challenge is more about how they have to get there, which means how long can these spending restrictions be sustained? How long can, I'm citing here my co-panelists, how long can the weak spending quality, the small public services be sustained before their spending controls become more difficult than revenue collection?
Questions next. I'll just give my own observation, personal observation. Informal economy is always challenging to tax. It's universally challenging. And that's why what we call tax administration needs to be smart, not just cooperative. You have to differentiate between the big fish and the small fish. And the way to achieve that, essentially in every tax policy, in tax law, there is concepts of thresholds or exemption. So we say that, okay, up to a certain point, below that, we are not tax. That applies for income tax, that applies for VAT. So it is differentiated in the tax law itself in that way to make it a little bit more smart. So that resource efficiency, for a tax administration, it's not free good. You have to hire people, you have to give them services, you have transport these, that, to administer the tax. Yes. And that requires money. So there is an efficiency factor, how much a tax official can have. So smartness is very important in that regard. A threshold is the one that generally used for. However, it is also true that by not taxing certain income, you are also making the field unequal. So the tax laws sometimes, like in the VAT law, introduces a small tax, like turnover tax of 2-3% for small businesses. So irrespective of your sales, you pay 2% tax turnover, and nothing else will be. No tax credit, nothing will be. So that's also part of the tax law. That's how you generally take care of even playing field, because we don't want somebody paying 3% and the next to a small one not paying anything. then you'll be taking away the customers increase the price, and we don't want it. So that's how it is. Debt relief issue, I must say one thing that Bangladesh has a proud history of not defaulting any time, and that's important. Hold on. Just give me an historical. I remember. Actually, I was in the fund IMF at the time. Very big initiative. Bangladesh was considered on the one hand a big country because it was poor, because it was at that time relatively highly indebted in the sense of debt. Foreign debt ratio was very high at that in the early 90s. And on the other hand, Bangladesh was still, because the debt was very concessional, non-market based, it was able to pay for it. So there was this contradiction within the IMF that should Bangladesh be inside or outside? And eventually, our management decided to ask Bangladesh government whether they will be interested to be member of the BRAC initiative. But let me tell you one thing. I had a conversation with, at that time, the finance minister was Fiscal. And I asked him over lunch, and should Bangladesh go for it? And his answer was that absolutely no. We will honor our obligations and we will continue. And he gave the same answer to the managing director, and we were in the party. I don't see we going to that far. We hope we don't have to go that far, and we maintain our pride. It's as we honoring our contributions to the international community. On the low tax base, I just want to say one thing that again, quoting from our social, he made an observation that everything looks good for Bangladesh, but I have a discomfort. And he said, how could a country with such a low tax base and size of the government can never become high middle income or upper middle class? Is that possible? To me, the answer is no. It's not possible. We have to do something about it. Otherwise, we have to forgo about it. Thank you.
Sir, fiscal and monetary is the last comment. Fiscal policy and monetary policy.
Fiscal and monetary policy always have to go hand in hand. They have to complement each other. Like, for example, the current macroeconomic situation, which is very extremely challenging situation. Here, on the one hand, government is facing fiscal challenge. On the other hand, government is facing inflationary pressure, tremendous high inflation. And we all know inflation at the end of the day, despite all the controversies and everything, is a monetary. You have to address it primarily through your monetary. You can hope for a supply side response, unwinding or positively becoming this and that, but that's not going to change your future. So, what I always say in press and still repeating that our current inflationary situation, the narrative that the government is giving, that is because of this, Ukraine, Russia, war, etc. Yes, it was at some point that narrative was valid, but it is no longer valid. Our problem is our own creation, and our problem, we have to solve it through prudent management of both monetary and application of smart monetary policy, interest rate policy, flexibly, sometimes ruthlessly. I just always say that when Federal Reserve is setting interest rate policy, it doesn't listen to Wall Street. It listens to data and their don't do politics with subsidies. You do apply the policies to achieve the objective, which is for the good of the people. If you don't do that, pay the price. We are paying a price.
Thank you, Samit.
ধন্যবাদ। আমাদের দেশ বাংলাদেশ আমার মনে হয় না যে আমাদের যেটা আসিফ মনসুর বললেন ওই পর্যায়ে যাবে এবং আমরা খুব প্রাউড যে আমরা কোনো সময় পথ করি এবং আশা করি সামনেও ভবিষ্যতে আমরা পথ করবো না। ট্যাক্স রেভিনিউ কালেকশনের বিষয়টা যেটা আমি বলতে চাই যে ওখানে আমার জিজ্ঞেস করার নামটা তুমি খুব একটা ভালো প্রশ্ন জিজ্ঞেস করলেন যে ইনফর্মাল সেক্টরটাকে কিভাবে আমরা এই ট্যাক্সের মধ্যে আনতে পারি, কি ইনসেন্টিভ দিয়ে বা যেটাই করা দরকার সেটা করেই আমাদের ইনফর্মাল সেক্টরকে এটার মধ্যে নিয়ে আসতে হবে। এবং কেন আনতে হবে সেটার মূল কারণটা হচ্ছে এখানে আমি একটু মানে সাহস নিয়ে একটু ডিফার করি আমাদের ডক্টর আসিফ মনসুর এবং ডক্টর ফ্রান্সিসকার সঙ্গে। কারণ ওই ট্যাক্স এফিসিয়েন্সি প্ল্যানিং এবং রিকভারি করতে যে আমরা যে ডিফারেন্সিয়েটটা করি এই বিগ ফিশ স্মল ফিশ, তখনই কিন্তু সবাই একটা সুযোগ পেয়ে যায় যে আমি আর বিগ ফিশ হব না। আমি বিগ ফিশ না হয়ে কিভাবে আমি স্মল ফিশে সাঁতার কাটতে পারি যেন আমি কারো চোখে না। এটাই কিন্তু ব্যবসায়ীরা বারবার বলে যে এই বড় ব্যবসায়ীদের পিছিয়ে শুধু লেগে থাকে, এই লার্জ ট্যাক্স পেয়ার ইউনিটের পিছিয়ে বারবার এসে এসে অডিট করবে, ট্যাক্স দিবে। এই মেন্টালিটি থেকে আমাদের একটু বার হয়ে, যদিও এখানে আমরা আমার চেয়ে আরো অনেক জ্ঞানী, বাট এখান থেকে আমাদের বার হয়ে আমাদের ওই ছোট ক্ষুদ্র বা ইনফর্মাল সেক্টর এদেরকে আমাদের এনকারেজ করতে হবে ট্যাক্স দিতে আসার জন্য। কারণ তারা হয়তো বা এখন ক্ষুদ্র বা এখন ছোট আছে, 2 বছর 5 বছর পরে কিন্তু তারা নাও থাকবে, তো সেটা তো একটা গ্রোথ থাকে। কিন্তু ওই মেন্টালিটিটা আমাদের রাখতে হবে যে এনাদের ট্যাক্স পে করতে হবে, আজকে হোক কালকে হোক এই জিনিসটাকে আমাদের উপর ফোকাস করতে হবে। and that is why we need to incentivize. এটা এই মানে না যে একবার আমরা ওনাকে নিয়ে এসে আমরা ওনাকে পানি করব না, ওই কালচার অফ পেইং ট্যাক্সেস অন আওয়ার ওন এইটা আমাদের ভিতরে দিতে হবে।
আমার যে কোশ্চেনটা ছিল যে 90 লাখের উপরে মোটামুটি টিম বাংলাদেশে হয়ে আছে, আর এই বছরের ডাটা অনুসারে মোটামুটি 27 লাখের মতো ট্যাক্স রিটার্ন করছে। সো কন্ট্রাস্টটা কিন্তু আমরা সবসময় দেখতেছি যে অলরেডি যদি আগের বছর থেকে দেখি মোটামুটি 15 লাখের মতো টিম বেশি হয়েছে। সো কন্ট্রাস্টটা আছে সবসময়, কিন্তু আসলে আমাদের মধ্যে কি আছে কিনা, বা আপনি বিজনেসের যে জায়গা থেকে বললেন একটা বাংলাদেশের সবচেয়ে বড় প্রতিষ্ঠানকে আপনি রিপ্রেজেন্ট করেন, ব্যবসায়ীদের যে মেন্টালিটিটা এটা আসলে কি পরিষ্কার কিনা, বা আলটিমেটলি যারা আমাদের বাবা চাচা বা যারা আসলে ওই প্রসেসে আছে তারা আসলে এটা কি মানে এই লোকটাকে কি আসলে তারা
এই জায়গায় আসছে নতুন প্রজন্ম আর আগের প্রজন্ম। থট প্রসেস কিন্তু আপনি জেনারেলাইজ করতে পারেন। আমার বাবা ট্যাক্স নাও দিতে পছন্দ করতে পারে, কিন্তু আমি যে সেটা অ্যাডপ্ট করতে হবে সেটা কিন্তু কোনো নজির না। আমাদের এখানে অনেক বড় বড় কোম্পানি আসছে যাদের সেকেন্ড জেনারেশনরা বিদেশ থেকে পড়ালেখা করে আসার পরে এক্সপিরিয়েন্স নিয়ে আসার পরে তারা কিন্তু তাদের কোম্পানিগুলো এখন কিন্তু কর্পোরেট বিদেশি কর্পোরেট স্টাইলে কিন্তু চালাচ্ছে। কমপ্লায়েন্স কিন্তু তাদের অনেক, আমি নিজে অনেক এরকম কোম্পানি দেখেছি যেখানে তাদের ছেলেমেয়েরা যারা এখন এমডি হচ্ছে, ম্যানেজিং ডিরেক্টর হচ্ছেন, এসে বলছেন যে সামির ভাই আপনি ল ফার্ম মাস্ট মেক শিওর যে আমাদের কিন্তু একদম ফুললি কমপ্লায়েন্ট থাকে, আমি কোনো হ্যাসেল চাই। আবার যারা আমাদের প্রিডেসেসর যারা কাজ করে গেছে তারা হয়তো বা একটা করতে করতে একটা পর্যায়ে নিয়ে আসছে, তারা তখন হয়তো বা সবাই না কিছু এদিক ওদিক করে করে আপনার ট্যাক্স ফুললি না দিয়ে হয়তো এসে পড়েছে, কিন্তু সেটা তো আমাদের বেঞ্চমার্ক হতে পারে না। আমাদের বেঞ্চমার্কটা আমাদের নিজের কাছ থেকে, আমি যেটা আপনাদের কাছে বলছি বলন করছি যে যেটা নিজের কাছ থেকে আসবে সেটা আপনাকে সরকার কোনো সময় ইম্পোজ করে কিন্তু আপনাকে বার করতে পারে, কারণ আমাদের এখানে ফাঁক ফুকার অনেক বেশি, এবং কেউ যদি নিজের থেকে না দিতে চান ওই ক্যাপাসিটি নাই যে এনবিআর যে খুঁজে খুঁজে আমার এই এতগুলা কোটি মানুষের মধ্যে এটাকে নিয়ে আসতে হবে। এই জন্য বলুন যে মাইন্ডসেটটা আমাদের দেশ হিসাবে চিন্তা করতে হবে এবং আগায় নিয়ে যেতে হবে। আপনি যদি মনে করেন হ্যাঁ আমি এটা পুরানটাই আমি অ্যাডপ্ট করে চলে চালাই যাবো, আপনি পেয়ে যাবেন, কিন্তু তাহলে আর এই বড় বড় সেমিনার করে কোনো লাভ হবে না। আমরা চা কফি খেয়ে আপনি করে করে তারপর বিদেশে যাবেন, তারপর বলবেন যে বিদেশ কত, এটাই তো হচ্ছে, এটাই তো হচ্ছে বাস্তব। তো এই জিনিসটাতে আমাদেরকে আমাদের নিজের মাইন্ডসেটটা চেঞ্জ, বিকজ আমি এটা টোনটা আমি এখন আমি কিন্তু ওরকম হাই লেভেল এখানে যা যা লিখে দিচ্ছে আমাকে ঢাকাতে আমি তো ওগুলো বলি। আপনাদের অডিয়েন্স দেখে আমি বললাম যে কিন্তু আমার পুরো বক্তব্যটাই কিন্তু আমি চেঞ্জ করে দেবো, বিকজ আপনাদের দরকার হচ্ছে রেজিং দি অ্যাওয়ারনেস, কারণ আপনারাই কালকে ভবিষ্যৎ। এখানে এখানে যারা বসে আছেন এরা তো ভবিষ্যৎ বলা যায়, এরা বর্তমানে প্রবলেমটা বলবে, এই বললে আপনারা ওইটাকে নিয়ে মাথায় নিয়ে আপনারা ভবিষ্যতে আগাইতে।
না আপনিও ভবিষ্যৎ, অবশ্যই আপনি
না না সেটা তো আপনাদের মধ্যে কিছুটা আমি আর হাইব্রিড সিচুয়েশন আছে। But I endorse completely what Dr. Francisca is saying. It's a very important presentation. We need to keep a check. And informal sector, there is definitely an issue of bringing the working out the capacity and the expenditure that NBR needs to assess before going after all this informal sector. But my point, which I was trying to make, is that as soon as we differentiate between the big fish and the small fish, there comes the problem. Because businesses come to me and say to me that, oh, once I go into the large taxpayers unit, every time I'm getting audit and every time people are coming behind me. But what about the informal sector? Instead of bringing them under the taxes, why are you going and penalizing me? So it's better I stay away from it. It's better I don't come forward. Better I don't become a large taxpayers unit, because I don't want that tax card. If you're going to come back and collect from the same place, better the devil is not complete problem. Right? So that's the complaint which I'm saying. And also, we must bear in mind that here the government has to take a hit, whether even in terms of spending money to increase the capacity for the NBR. Because these small fishes in the informal sector will not remain small or may not remain small in the years to come. And then when they grow, they would have already been into this habit of paying taxes. So that's what I'm trying to say. And also I'm trying to instill into the younger generation that you must come forward. It's not possible for the government on their own to pinpoint and collect it. There's too many loopholes in every taxation system in all over the world. You go to a good tax lawyer, they will tell you how to not fully pay your taxes. But that's the way the whole world works. It's not Bangladesh. The whole world works like that. So we need to come forward as a nation to move Bangladesh forward. Thank you.
This is the last question.
আমার এই অবস্থায় আমি দেশবন্ধুর রিপোর্টার, যেটা আলোচনা হচ্ছে এতক্ষণ ধরে যে আমরা ঐতিহাসিকভাবে রিপোর্টার নই, যে এটা খুব ভালো খবর। কিন্তু আমরা দেখতে পাচ্ছি যে আমাদের নেট রিজার্ভ $18 বিলিয়ন নিচে চলে আসছে। আমাদের যে বৈদেশিক মুদ্রা সেটি হলো যে 41 মাসের মধ্যে সর্বনিম্ন, এবং হলো আমাদের যে অর্থ ছাড়, বৈদেশিক ঋণে অর্থ ছাড়, সেটি হলো যে গত বছর আগস্টের তুলনায় এবছর আগস্টে 18% কমে গেছে। বিপরীতে আমাদেরকে ঋণ শোধ করতে হয়েছে গত বছরের তুলনায় 38% বেশি। সুতরাং সব জিনিসই হলো যে আমাদের বিপক্ষে যাচ্ছে আর কি। কিন্তু আমরা কি খুব দ্রুত ঐতিহাসিক ভাবে যে আমাদের যে সুনামটা আছে সেই সুনামটা ক্ষুণ্ণ হতে যাচ্ছে কিনা, বা আমরা বিফলটা হতে যাচ্ছে কিনা?
আগে ডক্টর আসান মনসুরের রেসপন্সটা শুনি, তারপর আমি উনি আরো এসব ব্যাপারে আমার অনেক জ্ঞানী, কিন্তু আমি তো সবসময় পজিটিভ থাকি। করোনার মধ্যেও কিন্তু পাশের দেশে কিন্তু অনেক ইয়ে হয়েছে, আল্লাহর রহমতে আমাদের তো ওরকম হয় না। উনিরা আরো ভালো জানতে পারে, এটা নিয়ে আমাদের লেখাপড়া
স্যার একটু বাংলা করলে ভালো হয়।
আমি যেটা বলবো যে আমরা একটা ইকোনমিক আছি, কোনো সন্দেহ নেই। যে জিনিসটা দুঃখজনক সেটা হলো যে সরকার প্রায় 1.5 বছর সময় দিচ্ছে কারেক্টিভ পলিসি দেওয়ার, সেটা নেই। যে কারণেই হোক, রাজনৈতিক বা অন্যান্য কারণে এক ধরনের ন্যারেটিভ যেটাকে দেওয়া হচ্ছিল, ন্যারেটিভ অফ ইনভিনসিবিলিটি, যেটা আমরা ভালো করছি, ভালো করবো, থাকবো, আমাদের কিছু হবে। এই মানে কি বলে উন্নাসিকতাই বলি বা বাস্তবতার সাথে তাল মিলিয়ে না চলাটা সেটার জন্য কিন্তু আজকে এই যে ট্যাক্স সিস্টেম যে কোলাপসটা হচ্ছে আমরা দেখতে পাচ্ছি চোখের সামনে, এটা নিয়ে কিন্তু আমরা আজকে থেকে কথা বলি, 10 বছর আগে থেকে এবং বলছি এটা আসবে এখন এটা এসে গেছে। এই যে জিনিসটা হচ্ছে এটা আমরা কি 15 বছর আমরা বিভঙ্গ করতে পারতাম না, এই সমস্যা কি চিহ্নিত হয়নি, কার্যকর ব্যবস্থা নেওয়া। এখন জিনিসটা হচ্ছে যে আমি কি আমার ওই যে ন্যারেটিভ বর্ণনা যে সব ঠিক আছে, দেশে কোনো কিছু হয়নি, দেশ ভালোভাবে চলছে, এই বর্ণনা যদি আমি থাকি তাহলে আমি কিন্তু ইকোনমিক ম্যানেজমেন্টটাকে সেইভাবে করতে পারবো। আমি যদি ওই বর্ণনা নিতে থাকি যেটা আমাদের অ্যাবসেন্ট অর্থমন্ত্রী বললেন সব ঠিক আছে, এখন অসুবিধাটা তো জনগণ বুঝে, আমরা তো এটা তো বলে দিতে হবে না। এখন এসেও যদি রাজনীতিবিদ হয়ে যদি এটাকে না বুঝেন তাহলে তো বোঝানোর উপায় নেই। আমাদের ইকোনমিক ম্যানেজমেন্টের পলিটিক্যাল লিডারশিপের আমি প্রচন্ড অ্যাবসেন্স দেখতে পাচ্ছি। There is no leadership in economic team and there is no strong economic management for a crisis moment that what we should have যেমন থাকা দরকার ছিল সেটা নাই, এখনো নাই। তো এই কারণে আমাদের যেটা দরকার কিছু, what is our problem, how big is the problem, where are our payment liabilities lies, কোথায় কোথায় আমাদের টাকা দিতে হবে, সেটা বিদ্যুৎ খাতের জন্য এত বিলিয়ন, পেট্রোলিয়াম আমদানিতে এত বিলিয়ন, বিমানের ভাড়ার জন্য এত বিলিয়ন, এটার জন্য শর্ট টার্ম রেটে 12 বিলিয়ন, এগুলোকে আইডেন্টিফাই করে তারপরে জবাব দিতে হবে ক্যান আই পে ইট অল? Answer is no, you cannot, you don't have that. তাহলে আমি কিভাবে এটা ম্যানেজ করব? How am I going to formalize it? How am I going to roll it over? How am I going to manage the crisis? সেই নীল নকশা, the blueprint is not there, even not today. So essentially, that what do? Now you have the election knocking at you, and it is not a normal election. It's not like in India or other industrial countries that is going to happen. Every party will participate with enthusiasm and all, and the voters will exercise. We don't have that. So we have a potential political tension, transition, uncertainty, and all kinds of things that's also complicating our economic management and the outcome in the government. So right now we need to have a very short-term plan, and that's the message we also gave the governor of Bangladesh Bank and Finance Secretary, that you need a very short-term plan just to maintain a reserve level. Also, the pocket of so keep it until the election. Get some money from abroad, including World Bank, IMF second judge, and maybe bilateral countries like India, Saudi Arabia, Emirates, which give money to Pakistan, we can also Bangladesh. We can explore various options and use them to protect our neighbors. And go for very strong, no matter which government comes. It's not a choice anymore. It's a neutrality. করতেই হবে এই ট্যাক্স রিফর্ম, এগুলো হয়তো 5 বছর লাগবে, implement it in 5 years. We have to do our fiscal management issues. We have to address our exchange rate policy and whole structure of export exportation, which is a big failure for us as well. Didn't come into discussion, but it's there. So all these fundamental issues have to be addressed if we really want to rebound and go for a growth path in a sustainable way. Continue to restore macroeconomic stability. ফেরত পেতে হলে আমাদেরকে পূর্ণাঙ্গ একটা রিফর্ম প্রোগ্রাম হাতে নিতে হবে। Once the government comes in power, whichever government, hopefully a stable government, that will be able to undertake that set up strong dose of economic policies. It's not the time now.
এখানে কিছু বলার নেই, কিছু বলুন। At least উনি যে বসছেন এটাই আমরা খুশি। আপনি গিয়েছিলেন বাংলাদেশ ব্যাংকে গিয়েছিলেন, যে ওনারা যে ওনাকে ওয়েলকাম করে কথাবার্তা শুনে ওনাদের মতো বিজ্ঞ জনের অ্যাডভাইস দিচ্ছেন বা পরামর্শ করছেন, এটা আশা করি ইনশাআল্লাহ এটা সবাই একত্রে মিলে আমরা একটু মত করে এটাই হবে সবার জন্যই তো হবে, কিন্তু আমার আর আপনার বলে we are all in this and we'll pull it together. I'm sure we will, inshallah.
I'm not sure whether you understood me. Glad that you understood me.
Okay, Steve Jobs versus police stay hungry, the police party.
So, we would like to make any concluding comments.
Just to thank you very much. Just to thank my co-panelists. And I enjoyed the heated exchange, although I didn't understand a word of it.
আমি বললাম যে ভালো যে কতটা পুরোটা বুঝিনি। তো এটা তো আমার মনে হয় যে আমরা একটু, আমি বাংলাতেই বলি, একটু আমরা শেষ করি। আমি দু একটা কথা একটু বলতে চাই। সেটা হচ্ছে যে আমরা যে বাংলাদেশের, আমি যদি বলি গত এক দশকে কোভিডের আগে যে দশকটা আমাদের ধরি, সেই দশকটা এক অর্থে কিন্তু এক অর্থে একটা অন্য একটা সুবর্ণ একটা সময় ছিল বাংলাদেশের অর্থনীতির জন্য। কারণ আমরা যেরকম একটা প্রবৃদ্ধি, যেরকম একটা ধারাবাহিক একটা প্রবৃদ্ধি দেখেছি কোভিডের আগে 2020-এর কোভিডের আগ পর্যন্ত, এবং তার সুফল কিন্তু মোটামুটি কোনো না কোনো ভাবে সবাই পেয়েছে। কিন্তু এরপরে যে কোভিড এবং তারপরে যে আমরা ক্রাইসিস গুলো দেখছি, এটাতে সবচেয়ে বেশি যে সমস্যাটা এসছে এখন, সেটা হচ্ছে ডক্টর আসান যেটা বললেন যে ইকোনমিক ম্যানেজমেন্টের প্রবলেম। সুসময় যখন চলছিল তখন হয়তো ইকোনমিক ম্যানেজমেন্টের ইস্যুটা অতটা সামনে আসেনি, কারণ অর্থনীতি তার নিজের গতিতেই হয়তো সমস্যাগুলো অনেকটা হাইড করে রেখেছিল, যে এই সমস্যাটা তখনও ছিল, সমস্যা তখন হয়তো প্রকট হয়ে আসে। কিন্তু যখন আমরা দেখলাম যে কোভিড প্লাস রাশিয়া ইউক্রেন যুদ্ধ, দেন ফলো আপ যে গ্লোবাল প্রাইস, দেন ডোমেস্টিক ইকোনমিতে যে বিভিন্ন ফ্রন্টে যে প্রবলেম গুলো আসা শুরু হলো, বিশেষ করে ফরেন রিজার্ভ যেভাবে ড্রাস্টিক্যালি ফল করেছে, 2 বছরের মধ্যে অর্ধেকের কমে নেমে এসছে, তারপরে ইনফ্লেশন যে প্রেশার, এটা আনপ্রেসিডেন্টেড এত লম্বা সময় ধরে, এবং আমরা দেখছি যে আমাদের যে ফরেন আর্নিংস এর যে সোর্সগুলো বেসিক্যালি এক্সপোর্টের ক্ষেত্রে, সেটা খুব আশাব্যঞ্জক নয়, কখনো ভালো কখনো কমে যায়। আর ডাইভার্সিফিকেশনের দিকে তো আমাদের সেরকম কোনো সাকসেস খুবই দুর্বল, নেই সেরকম। রেমিটেন্সের দিকটা যেটা আমাদের অ্যানাদার সোর্স, বিগ সোর্স অফ আমাদের ফরেন এক্সচেঞ্জ, সেখানেও আমরা দেখছি যে ইনফর্মাল চ্যানেলসে যে রেমিটেন্স আসছে, সেটাও কিন্তু একটা বড় ধরনের একটা প্রবলেম হিসেবে ক্রিয়েট হচ্ছে, কারণ আমরা রেমিটেন্সের গ্রোথ ইজ অলসো নেগেটিভ আমরা লাস্ট 3 মান্থসে যে আমরা দেখতে পাচ্ছি। এবং এটা অর্থ এই না যে আমাদের দেশে যে এত মানুষ বাইরে যাচ্ছে দেশ থেকে, তারা দেশে টাকা পাঠাচ্ছে, টাকা পাঠাচ্ছে, কিন্তু হুন্ডি এবং ইনফর্মাল যে এক্সচেঞ্জ চ্যানেলস গুলো, তার সাথে সম্পর্কিত হচ্ছে যে বাংলাদেশ থেকে যারা টাকা পাচার করছে বাইরে, সেটারও একটা বড় ধরনের একটা লিঙ্ক আছে, যে হুন্ডি বিজনেস রানা মাথা। সো পুরো প্রবলেমটা যেটা আমি বলতে চাচ্ছি, যে যেটা ডক্টর আসান মনসুর খুব সুন্দর করে জিনিসটাকে যেভাবে আনলেন সামনে, যে there is a problem, এবং প্রবলেমটাকে ইগনোর করার কোনো উপায় নেই। এবং এই প্রবলেমটাকে যদি ইগনোর করি আমরা, প্রবলেমটা যদি আমরা কার্পেট নিচে রেখে দিই, আমরা যদি মনে করি যেটা আপনা আপনি ঠিক হয়ে যাবে বাংলাদেশের ইকোনমিক প্রবলেমগুলো, এটা একটা ভুল ধারণা। এবং একটা জিনিস আমি একটু বলতে চাই, সেটা হচ্ছে যে সমস্যাগুলো আপনারা দেখেছেন যে IMF এর সাথে ঋণের শর্তে সরকার গিয়েছে, সেই শর্তগুলো অনেকগুলো কিন্তু গত 1 দশক ধরে আলোচিত হচ্ছে বিষয়গুলো, সংস্কারের বিষয়গুলো, আর্থিক খাতের সংস্কার, কর খাতের সংস্কার, পাবলিক স্পেন্ডিং এ ম্যানেজমেন্টে যে শিক্ষার্থী সংস্কার, এগুলো কিন্তু একটা নতুন কিছু না। এমনকি যেটা আমি আমার শুরুর দিকে কথাই বলেছিলাম, যে গভর্নমেন্ট অলসো শো ইটস কমিটমেন্ট টু আন্ডারটেক দিস রিফর্ম ইন ইটস 5-year plans। তাহলে এগুলো হচ্ছে না কেন হয়? এবং আমি যে ধারণা, এবং সেটা আমি আসামের সাথে আমি কিছু বিষয় আমি একমতই বলছি, যে সামনের 2-3টা বছর বাংলাদেশের অর্থনীতির জন্য খুব গুরুত্বপূর্ণ। কারণ আমাদের ম্যাক্রো স্ট্যাবিলিটিটাকে ফিরিয়ে আনা এটা কিন্তু ছেড়ে ফেলার ব্যাপার না। কিন্তু কোনোভাবে মনে করো না যে এখনই যদি কারেক্টিভ মেজার্স গুলো নেওয়া যায় খুব দ্রুত ম্যাক্রো স্ট্যাবিলিটি ফিরে আসে, সময় লাগে। আর কারেক্টিভ মেজার্স গুলো যেগুলো অনেক আগে নেওয়া দরকার ছিল সেগুলো যেহেতু ঠিক সময় নেওয়া হয়নি, সেগুলো কিন্তু নতুন আরো কিছু কমপ্লিকেশন সাইড এফেক্ট ক্রিয়েট করেছে। এবং সুতরাং ইট ডাজন্ট মিন যে এখনো যদি কারেক্টিভ মেজার্স গুলো নেওয়া হয়, রিফর্ম গুলো নেওয়া হয়, সেগুলো খুব দ্রুত ফল দিবে। কারণ সাইড যে এফেক্ট গুলো ক্রিয়েট হয়েছে, আনওয়ান্টেড আনইনটেন্ডেড যে কনসিকুয়েন্স যেগুলো হয়েছে রিফর্ম গুলো টাইমলি না নেওয়ার কারণে, সেগুলোকে হ্যান্ডেল করার জন্য নিড অ্যাডিশনাল এফোর্ট, অন্য আরো অনেক কিছু করতে। তো এই যে একটা কমপ্লিকেটেড সিনারিওতে আমরা আছি, এখানে উই নিড স্ট্রং পলিটিক্যাল উইল এবং টু আন্ডারটেক দিস রিফর্মস। এবং এখানে যারা এই রিফর্ম গুলো করার ক্ষেত্রে একটা জিনিস আমরা মোটামুটি সবাই একমত হবো যে রিফর্মের there is a resistance to this reform. যারা এই রিফর্ম গুলোকে রেজিস্ট করে এবং বিরোধিতা করতে দেয় না নানাভাবে, there are some vested interest groups বিভিন্নভাবে। তো এগুলোর বিরুদ্ধে গিয়ে, এই ইন্টারেস্ট গ্রুপস গুলোর বিরুদ্ধে গিয়ে যে স্ট্রং পলিটিক্যাল উইল নিয়ে আমরা দেখতে চাই যে সামনের দিনগুলোতে এই রিফর্ম গুলো করা হচ্ছে। তা না হলে যে কনসার্ন আমরা রেজ করছি যে এই ইকোনমি ম্যাক্রো স্ট্যাবিলিটিটাকে ফিরিয়ে আনা, যে ফিসকাল চ্যালেঞ্জ যে কথাটা আজকে আমরা সেমিনারের মেইন টপিকটা ছিল, সেটা ইমপ্রুভের চেয়ে যদি আরো ডেট্রিমেন্ট করে তাহলে কিন্তু দ্যাট উইল বি এ বিগ কনসার্ন ফর আস। এবং সমস্যাটা হচ্ছে যে অনেক সময় আমি জাস্ট উদাহরণ যে আমরা কোনোভাবে এক দেশের আরেক দেশে তুলনা করি না, তুলনা করতে চাইও না, কিন্তু তারপরও প্রশ্নগুলো যেহেতু আসে সেক্ষেত্রে বলতে চাই জাস্ট একটা উদাহরণ হিসেবে, শ্রীলঙ্কা কিন্তু একসময় আপার মিডল ইনকাম কান্ট্রিতে উঠে গিয়েছে এবং শ্রীলঙ্কা তারপরে নেমে এখন লোয়ার মিডল ইনকাম কান্ট্রিতে চলে এসেছে। এবং শ্রীলঙ্কার আমরা জানি যে ইকোনমিক ক্রাইসিস কিভাবে একটা পর একটা ডোমিনো এফেক্টস এর মতো হয়েছে, যখন আর কন্ট্রোলই করা যায়নি এটাকে করা হচ্ছে। সো আমি আশা করবো যে আমরা ওই জিনিসগুলো হবে না বাংলাদেশে, কিন্তু উই নিড টু অ্যাকচুয়ালি আন্ডারটেক কারেক্টিভ মেজার্স, দেরি করার চেয়ে যত দ্রুত নেওয়া যায়। এবং একটা জিনিস যেটা আমি বলে শেষ করবো যে আগামী কয়েক মাসে আমার যেটা concern সেটা হচ্ছে যে whether economic issues will get the right kind of priority among the policymakers, because আমরা জানি যে political tensions, election is there in January এবং এটাকে নিয়ে টেনশনও আছে। সুতরাং এই যে এটাকে, so whether political issues become more important than economic issues, and then again the policymakers need to be very very careful যে আমরা এখন যে জায়গায় আছি আগামী 3 মাস পর 4 মাস পরে ইকোনমি যেন এক থেকে আর ওয়ার্ড সিচুয়েশনে না যায়। ডক্টর আসাম হোসেন পুরো একমত যে একটা ব্রেক বসতে হবে এখন অর্থনীতিতে, যাতে আমরা এর থেকে খারাপ জায়গায় না যাই। এবং সেক্ষেত্রে দুটো জায়গা, দুটো তিনটা ইন্ডিকেটরের মধ্যে একটা তো অফকোর্স ফরেন এক্সচেঞ্জ রিজার্ভ, মার্কেট ইনফ্লেশন প্রেশার। So we need to be very very careful about that. So again, thank you very much. I thank Dr. Francisca and her team. There are other participants from World Bank too here, and thank you so much for coming here and joining hands with SANEM to have this program today. And the discussion and the presentation I think was very relevant, and I'm glad that we actually could have some very good questions from the audience too. And we would be very happy to take this discussion forward. I again thank our two distinguished panelists, Dr. Sami Sattar and of course Dr. Asim also to join us in this very important project. With this, I conclude this session.